Welcome to Cyber Power of Tigray Media, our followers and subscribers. Today we have a special edition with Professor Dr. Galadios Araya. Actually, call him doctor because even though he's a professor, he's
It's
okay.
both.
Exactly. Today we have a special edition. Actually, as you know, everyone, Professor Galadios is the history and political science scholar. He's a professor in a New York area in the United States for a long time, since 1800 until currently. He's a professor of the history of Africa, history of global and the political science. So today, he will give us a lecture for about 20 minutes about the history, the historical and political dimensions of the Tigray War. This is very deep and very, nobody else discussed about this in the past. Today, he will give us a clear clarifications and details of the historical and political dimensions of the Tigray War. This is a special edition. Please follow us. And then after that, we will have a couple of questions. Once he's done about those, the history and the political dimensions of the Tigray War. After that, I will have him discuss about the No More campaign of TPLF. Especially the campaign is the ubiquity of TDF and the Federalists being all over in Ethiopia as well as other foreign countries, and the justice system when EPRDF was in power, and now comparing about the special security system of the Ethiopian when Getachew Asafa was in power, actually the intelligence general in Ethiopia, who is now wanted by Ethiopian government. So we have a very special edition today. Please follow us and subscribe us. And I will leave the stage for Dr. Galadios Araya. Please, Dr. Galadios Araya, use your time to explain and to give us a lecture about the historical and political dimensions of Tigray. Thank you so much. The war on Tigray.
Thank you, Mr. Ephraim, for that kind introduction. And as you have already stated, this is going to be a special one, special for the first time by Cyber Power of Tigray Media. And I am delighted that I'm going to present this today because so many people, too many media actually view the case of Tigray superficially. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up with some profound analysis of what it is all about, so that our audience understand, the young diaspora Tagaro understand, the diplomatic community understands as well. So I'm going to begin now. I have prepared some essay for this one, and I'm going to simply read what I wrote. So the title of the historical and political context of the war in Tigray is December 13 to 2021 today. This is a special program, and as its title implies, I intend to diagnose and explicate the complicated war in Tigray. As always, as I do in my speeches and essays, I will base my investigative discourses and arguments or reasoning on the base of my investigative discourses and arguments on the methodological framework of history and political science. And as Charles Tilly and Robert E. Goodwin aptly put it, the ultimate aim of political science is to identify general laws of political process that cut across the details of time, circumstance, and previous history. Moreover, knowledge of historical context provides a means of producing more system knowledge of political process. This is quite interesting because people don't view it that way. In this speech, I will address important themes such as the question of nationalities and self-determination, the Ethiopian constitution, the federal system versus unitary state, genocide, national reconciliation, the United Front of Ethiopian Federalist Forces, etc. And I would like to begin with some background information, sort of production to the current political mess, destructive war, and murder and death of thousands upon thousands of innocent Ethiopian people. On March 1, 2019, I sensed that some sort of movement led by Abiy and his cronies was up to eliminating the APRDF altogether and establish their own party. And this is how I reasoned then. In his recent meeting with the so-called APRDF-affiliated parties of Afar, Benishangul Gumuz, and Gambela, the Prime Minister announced that a new one party of all Ethiopia, not of Amhara, not Oromo, not Somali, will be formed. Although I was perplexed to hear the relatively bizarre announcement, I first had the impression that the new party is meant to replace the APRDF and thereby get ready for the forthcoming election. If this is the case, it will be counterproductive and the election will be messy. That's what I said then. On the second thought, however, I have perceived and interpreted the new forthcoming party as a party that includes Abiy and his close associates and the various opposition groupings that were invited to come to Ethiopia from the diaspora. The new party may not include the majority of the legally registered homegrown parties, although it may include some as token for the sake of positive image and legitimacy. At the other end of the spectrum, the new party may alienate other parties like the Oromo Liberation Front and the Tigray People's Liberation Front. But most importantly, my view of the new future party is that it is going to be essentially an elitist party and a superimposition from above and not a grassroots political party that could duly respect the right of the average Ethiopian in the electoral process. If this is going to be the nature and characteristics of the new party, it will grossly violate inclusivity and may find itself in contradistinction with the nationalities that make up the majority of the Ethiopian people and the regional states. What I call the new party, the new future party, in the above reasoning contradiction, later declared itself as Prosperity Party. And along with this party and its leadership, all of what I have foretold came to haunt us in the present Ethiopian crisis that culminated in the Tigray war. Before the war on Tigray, however, it was abundantly clear that Ethiopia was heading toward a one-man, one-party dictatorship, in many of its facets exhibiting fascistic conduct. I say fascistic because there is distinction between fascism and a fascistic behavior in political economy. Fascist regimes like the Mussolini, Hitler, Franco, etc. appeared on the world historical arena as a state of exception with a sole purpose to rescue the crumbling economy from total collapse. This was a unique phenomenon in history, and that's why we call the respective government state of exception regimes. Fascistic, on the other hand, is a manifestation of a cruel and average regime that wantonly destroys people and property. In our daily usage, we may unintentionally co-opt both concepts to explain the behavior of the violent and destructive regimes. And for people who suffer immensely under this type of regimes, it won't make any difference anyway. At any rate, as I have stated in my essay entitled Is Ethiopia Heading Toward a One-Man Show Politics or One-Party Dictatorship? Abiy Ahmed, though a brainchild of the EPRDF, his very tendencies and practices make him to be stepchild of his own party, whose alien father abandoned him to find his way up in the hierarchy ladder of the APRDF. The rigid and corrupt bureaucracy may have contributed to the emergence of a group within the APRDF to find their own separate way of seizing the state power. That's exactly what happened. Abiy and his cronies, what I like to call the fifth column, successfully usurped power, and ever since Ethiopia was exposed to imminent risk and disaster. And to be sure, some Ethiopian observers like Finn and Cunningham, early on, that is when the Abiy regime was installed, have detected political and economic problems that could grip Ethiopia as a result of losing its sovereignty and becoming dependent on foreigners in the construction of the great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam that was solely initiated by Ethiopians and financed by Ethiopians. Cunningham states, for Ethiopia, which stands alone as the one African nation historically not colonized by foreign powers, such proud history of independence could be soon lost. The author further tells us that the new prime minister has embraced Washington's Arab allies in the region, in particular Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. The nation, that is Ethiopia, which was seen up to now as an African role model for independent development, is being shifted from its erstwhile independence and partnership with China to become a client of Western capital and Washington's regional allies among the Arab states. This is Cunningham. So many other suspicious incidents have also taken place since the ascendance to power of Abiy Ahmed, some of which are the assassination of Chief of Staff General Saare Mokonnin, Major General Gazai Aberra, and Dr. Ambacho Mokonnin on June 15, 2019, almost a year before Engineer Semenyo Bekele, the chief manager of the Great Renaissance Dam, was assassinated. The loss of these key figures was a great loss for Ethiopia and has brought pain-induced grief to their immediate family members. Sadly, until today, the Attorney General did not reveal of its findings with respect to the crimes, and none of the murderers were brought before the courts. For all other prior incidents that are analogous but not necessarily identical are the burning of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church at Jijjiga, Kemise, Hawassa, and Debre Marcos, and the many ethnic conflicts and internal displacements. The government was unresponsive. And as a result of this incredulous, uncommitted, or fence-setting attitude of the government, the Ethiopian people live in hopelessness, inexplicable fear, and diffidence, as well as timidity. Despite all the above-mentioned political problems that have gripped the Ethiopian nation-state, without giving up hope altogether, sometime in August of 2018, I extended some advice to the Abiy regime to opt for peaceful resolution to his differences with the TPLF. But it was all in vain. On the contrary, Abiy listened to some external and official advisors who provided advices tainted with cynicism. One of these external advisors that I dealt with on August 2018 was Bronwyn Bruton, who have justified and verified the position of Abiy and Isaias on Tigray. She said, Abiy Ahmed and Isaias Afwerki are racing toward peace because they both face the same threat, hardliners in the Tigray People's Liberation Front. Although it might seem shocking to outside observers, there is a very clear reason why both leaders are suddenly so eager to cooperate. They are united by the presence of a still potent mutual enemy, the Tigray People's Liberation Front. This is what Browning said in Foreign Policy. She wrote it in Foreign Policy. It's incredible. She's just telling us that Isaias and Abiy have a common enemy, and the common enemy is TPLF. Furthermore, Browning argues that Abiy has proved more firebrand than expected and has been moving quickly to generate a political following and dismantle the TPLF grip on power. But she also contends that Abiy might confront limitations in his capacity to accomplish his mention of brushing aside the TPLF completely. She says the bad news for Abiy is that his maneuvers will probably have minimal effects. Abiy cannot possibly afford to fire 95% of the Ethiopian generals. By 95% of the Ethiopian generals, she meant they are Tigrayans. To consolidate his power, he needs to fire the worst, but co-opt the rest. And that process could take years. Abiy seriously considered Browning's advice in eliminating top generals of Tigrayan origin and co-opted some of them like Johannes Gabra-Maskal and Samura Yunus. But he would not have patience for the process that could take years. Thus, he was more dependent on his mentor, Isaias Afwerki, a wicked dictator who, in all his powers, wanted to destroy Tigray. And it's not surprising that both ventured into the war in Tigray. Why have Abiy and Isaias declared war on Tigray? And what could be their joint mission and objectives? Have they masterminded the war on Tigray on their own, or they have implemented the policies of their Arab allies? Have they conducted a domestic and regional war on Tigray with a mission to destroy Tigray and exterminate the Tigrayan people? Or they have carried out a geopolitical war on Tigray with the many external actors like the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, China, Russia, etc., and to some extent Iran and India. Our focus on geopolitical war on Tigray is extremely crucial and can enable us to understand the complex and complicated canvas of the objectives of war. But we should not lose sight of the main reason behind the outbreak of the war. The main reason is the contradiction that surfaced since the coming of Abiy between the nascent unitary forces and the already established federalist forces. The latter had conducted conferences many times at Mekelle and frightened Abiy Ahmed by their clear stance in defending the self-determination of the Ethiopian nationalities, the federal structure, and the constitution. Before I discuss the constitution and the federal system of Ethiopia that prevailed during the 27 years of EPRDF rule, I like to touch upon what a nation is all about and what self-determination entails. Before the Montevideo Convention of 1933, that defined a nation as a political entity of settled population, government, and a defined territory, it was Stalin who succinctly wrote on the nation and the question of nationalities back in 1913, in his small but seminal work entitled Marxism and National and Colonial Question. Thus, he defines the nation as a historically constituted stable community of people, formed on the basis of common language, territory, economic life, and psychological makeup, manifested in a common culture. The idea of the primacy of language and integrated economic life was borrowed from Karl Kautsky. Based on the latter's ideas, thus, Stalin emphasized on what he called national cultural autonomy, and he argued that such an approach would lead to the cultural and economic isolation of primitive nationalities, and that path forward should be the unification of various nations and nationalities into a unified stream of a higher culture. I believe Stalin had influenced the entire left movements, wherever they may be, including the Ethiopian students of the 1960s and 1970s, and most notably, as I have witnessed it myself, prominent student leaders like Brahana Mesqal Radda, Walilay Mokonnan, and Abraham Gebre እግዚአብሔር, later he was named Addis Hewat, were influenced by Stalin's idea on self-determination. The question of nationality in Ethiopia, this was the title of Walilay Mokonnan, and people or peoples of Ethiopia was authored by Abraham, were very popular and widely read. In retrospect, these militant students, of course, would not embrace Stalin's totalitarian state, his dictatorial regime, and his brutal mass massacre of his own people. But nonetheless, they pursued his ideas of self-determination of nationalities up to and including secession. Clearly, the Ethiopian students' legacy was translated into action by the EPRDF government, and that came up with a new political system of federalism that in turn restructured Ethiopia into regional autonomous states. Therefore, we have Article 39 of the Ethiopian Constitution, which actually addresses rights of nations, nationalities, and peoples, and clearly stipulates, number one, every nation, nationality, and people in Ethiopia have unconditional right to self-determination, including the right to secession. Two, every nation, nationality, and people in Ethiopia have the right to speak, to write, and to develop its own language, to express, to develop, and to promote its culture, and to preserve its history. Number three, every nation, nationality, and people in Ethiopia have the right to full measure of self-government, which includes the right to establish institutions of government in the territory that it inhabits and to equitable representation in the state and federal governments. Number four, the right to self-determination, including secession of every nation, nationality, and people, shall come into effect. This is number four. In number four, there are 5 items under that sub-article pertaining to the process and requirements that the seceding entity must fulfill. The process makes it difficult to secede, by the way. And the last one, number 5, a nation, nationality, or people, for the purpose of this constitution, it says, is a group of people who have or share large measure of a common culture or similar customs, mutual intelligibility of language, belief in a common or related identities, a common psychological makeup, and who inhabit an identifiable, predominantly contiguous territory. The number 5 item under Article 39 is modified version of what I have discussed earlier with respect to self-determination. The self-determination of nationalities does not contradict the unity of the people, as some Ethiopians have with some propensity to the old-fashioned unitary state have wrongly observed. On the contrary, self-determination or autonomy, and perhaps now we may need greater autonomy, builds the confidence of people because the federal system recognizes their respective district or regional state as a legal person. And once confidence is built and people are satisfied with their daily routine life, accompanied by peace, stability, and prosperity, the demand for secession becomes irrelevant to them. On the contrary, they forge a higher unity and a formidable and solid overarching territorial state. Why is self-determination so important? Humans, by their very nature, do not tolerate subjugation, oppression, and domination. And if they accept and justify even one of the triple components of the oppressing system, they know deep down that they will lose their identity and personhood. And that's why enslavement, feudal bondage, and colonialism are fiercely negated by people who aspire freedom and struggle and pay a price for it. The great Pan-Africanist and poet from Martinique, Aimé Césaire, once said, "A political and social regime that destroys the self-determination of a people also destroys the creative power of that people." Humans don't want to lose their personality, pride, and creativity, and they struggle for it and pay a price for it. All this is happening now in Tigray. The brave and fearless Tigray Defense Forces are a good example of self-determination freedom fighters. Their mission is to secure Tigray from the evil regimes who conducted genocide, and they want to make sure that ethnic cleansing in Tigray proper would never happen again. The Tigray diaspora forces also have contributed to the struggle and cause of the Tigray people. However, the challenge to the diaspora Tigrayan forces are that they should present themselves in no uncertain terms regarding genocide that took place in Tigray. I personally don't understand why the United Nations Security Council, the United States Congress, the European Union Parliament, the British Parliament, the Irish Parliament, the African Union, and a multitude of NGOs and human rights organizations are shy to call a spade a spade. Why are they nervous when it comes to the Tigray genocide? Why have they encountered trepidation and nervousness when they face issues surrounding the genocide of Tigray? Is it conflict of national interests or fear of diplomatic rupture in their conduct of international relations? Whether these major world organizations, governments, and global entities like it or not, we have a clearly defined article or articles on genocide by the Geneva Convention of 1946 that was ratified in 1948 and now as of 2018 ratified by 149 states. And the Rome Statute of 2002, which also clearly states that nations, members or not, are bound by the law of genocide. These world bodies, governments, and organizations cannot simply ignore and or overlook crimes against humanity and genocide when the people of Tigray have become victims of such atrocity in the 21st century. But if for some reason they are oblivious to the matter of genocide, I would gladly make my two-penny grant to refresh their memory on what genocide constitutes. But let me first begin with the popular maxim of the proverbial duck. If it looks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then it's a duck. Same goes to the Tigray genocide. If it's genocide, call it genocide. Thus, I present what genocide constitutes based on the Geneva Convention and the Rome Statute. Genocide constitutes any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, religious group. A, killing members of the group. B. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And E. Forcibly transferring children on the group to another group. All the above acts of genocide have happened in Tigray. But because the world organizations and governments that I mentioned earlier are highly politicized, they are reluctant to define genocide as genocide, let alone act in order to prevent acts of genocide or bring the perpetrators to justice. It is for this apparent reason that regimes and countries involved in genocide commit genocide repeatedly without any concern to punishment by the international criminal courts. For instance, Turkey committed genocide against Armenians in 1915, but because there was no condemnation by the world and even recognition of the massacre as genocide, the country is selling drones to the Abiy government and massacring the people of Tigray and other Ethiopian people. By the same token, the Darfur genocide in Western Sudan, where close to 500,000 people perished, the United Nations, European Union, and African Union never recognized it as genocide until recently, when the ICC took initiative and opened an office to investigate the Darfur case. The Bush administration, to his credit, has recognized the Darfur massacre as genocide, but that bold initiative could be political because Bush was after Omar al-Bashir then. Finally, I will briefly discuss the significance of the United Front of Ethiopian Federalist Forces, which I think would play an important role in ending the brutal regime of Abiy Ahmed, install a transitional government, reform the current constitution in order to include the forgotten nationalists in Ethiopian politics and in the decision-making process. Bring peace and stability to Ethiopia and the entire Horn of Africa zone, and the geopolitical marauding external forces, direct involvement in the war in Tigray, Oromia, Benishangul, Afar, and elsewhere in Ethiopia. The present forces of the United Front constitute Benishangul Gumuz, Kemant, Agao, Afar, Somali, Oromo, Sidama, Gambela, and Tigray, and soon will be joined by Walaita. Together, they will make a formidable force and bring profound political change after 4 years of fratricidal violence. Once the new transitional government is formed, perhaps the ICC and the UN, perhaps the ICC or the United Nations Security Council may not be needed to adjudicate the crimes committed by the Abiy and Isaias regimes. The transitional government will bring the perpetrators in person or in absentia before the highest court of Ethiopia to face justice. This act is also part of self-determination, independent decision-making. The most important contribution of the United Front's transitional government, however, is going to be the revival and restructuring of the federal system that increasingly was subsumed under the feeble Abiy-presided unitary state. Why is the federal system so important? There are unitary states that are good as well and worth having them, like Sweden, for instance. But while the unitary state evolved historically and was an encompassing gargantuan state with less regard to equality, justice, and equitable distribution of resources, the federal system is deliberately designed to implement a fair system to essentially meet equality amongst citizens, and most notably provides self-determination and autonomy to its respective states and districts. Michael A. Pagano, Dean Emeritus at the University of Illinois, Chicago, once said the 21st century might be destined to be federalism's Siculo di Oro, its gilded age, the finest hour. He said this in his book, The Dynamics of Federalism in National and Supranational Political Systems. I quoted Pagano's remarks in my article entitled The Federalist and Unitary System in Comparative Perspective and in the Ethiopian Context. In this article, I also referenced two other works of my colleagues in the academia who produced the best works on federalism. One of these colleagues are Thomas Hurlin and Alan Fina, authors of Comparative Federalism, A Systematic Inquiry. In this book, the authors argue federalism is almost always the result of a careful deliberation, agreement, and choice and compromise among constituent members. It differs from the other forms of plural and multi-level governance in that it contains a strong commitment to balanced equality. And in its philosophical sense, they further argue that federalism can be understood as a way of approaching politics that acknowledges group identity alongside individual identity. However, it's a particular form of group identity that federalism acknowledges, a spatial, locational, or territorial one. Above the federal system rests on the higher degree of autonomy that the constituent units enjoy within the political system. Ultimately, the most obvious objective or purpose of the federal state is the principle of shared and divided rule in order to meet the challenge of diversity, and in due course of undertaking its mission, the federal state is characterized by what Helen and Fina call coming together and holding together federalisms. The challenge to the transitional government that will be installed by the United Front of Ethiopian Federalist Forces is to find a new federal system that should fulfill all the attributes of federalism that I have discussed. And it should first start by compromise and national reconciliation. The best avenue is to begin an historic agenda for all nationalities and peoples of Ethiopia. Thank you. Here I finish my speech. I'm done.
It was amazing. Thank you so much. So Cyberpower of Tigray Media followers and subscribers, we are so lucky to have such a scholar here to educate us how the history and the political dimension of the Tigray, the war on Tigray. Thank you so much again. I don't know if you may have some time or if you're not tired enough, I can continue to ask you some questions.
That's okay. We can go ahead for another 15 minutes.
Okay, great. So I've seen a campaign going on against, they call it TPLF, but it's just the war is with Tigray. It says no more TPLF, comparing to the ambiguity of TDF and the Federalists being all over in Ethiopia, as well as other foreign countries. How do you describe this campaign now and the really, I mean, the actual movement of the?
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. First and foremost, I'd like to ask you as well. Who are those people who are saying no more TPLF?
Those are the supporters of Abiy Ahmed.
Oh, well, I would not be surprised then.
Right, exactly.
Because if that is Abiy's thing, it's not surprising. But there was some people who were entertaining the same thing, by the way.
That's a
Even-
dilemma I have actually. Are they still having problems differentiating the party and the people of Tigray? The war is with Tigray right now.
True, that's very true. But the thing is this: sometimes the people have do come with this. I mean, it's good to have a reasonable discussion on any issue. We can argue on any issue, but for that matter, it's sensible, it's healthy, it's democratic. However, some people go out of their way. They conduct what we call a hair splitting. Hair, you can't split the hair, right? It's so difficult. They want to make a hair splitting argument that doesn't make sense at all. So even I've heard this thing among the Tigrayan community as well. Some people are entertaining the idea of the TDF is completely different from the TPLF,
That's true.
but they see the differences. Okay, there could be differences, no problem, but they have commonality as well. They have something in common. How did it emerge? TDF simply cannot emerge on its own by itself. How did it come into this? I've heard so many TDF fighters, the young ones. They said actually it's the old guard of the TPLF who trained us, who helped us become fighters. So they are interconnected. Who trained them? How do they come into being? The only difference I see is the TPLF as a party that we know, that was the dominant party in the 27 years of governing Ethiopia. And the TDF now, not necessarily TPLF members. They could be non-TPLF Tigrayans who joined the fight, the struggle, because this has to do with the cause of Tigray. There were from other parts like Baitona and others who joined the struggle as well, who are not TPLF at all. But it's a Tigrayan agenda. So they had something in common. On the other hand, who cares? TPLF and TDF have a lot in common. They have differences as well. We have to see it that way. But if these views come from the side of the IB regime and his supporters, they have this wish that TPLF vanish altogether. You see, the wish is something else. The wish is subjective, but the objective reality is that TPLF is still around, whether they like it or not. It's still around. The thing is, I personally think that the TPLF has to make some profound change, because things have changed, totally changed. The war brought us something incredibly unheard of in human history. So you cannot go the way you used to go last year or 10 years ago. So you have to change. You have to go with the people. From now on, the TPLF itself should be a grassroots organization, a people's organization. They know it too, by the way. They know it very well that without the support of the Tigrayan people, they would have not succeeded.
That's true.
They've said it themselves. So you have to go down to the people, give them more power, let them participate, let other organizations also participate, like the legally registered parties in Tigray. You cannot be there by yourself all the time. It doesn't work that way. So they have to make change as well. That's how I see it.
Great. The next will be, I'm just going to mention about the justice system when EPRDF, Ethiopian People Republic Democratic Front, was in power versus the Abiy administration. It's obvious, but there are some things that I saw on the justice system that, especially the security system of Ethiopia, when Getachew Asafa was in power, the Ethiopian intelligence general, the former intelligence who is now wanted by the fascist regime of Abiy Ahmed. Well, well, I mean, when Getachew was in power, the security of the country was very intact. Even when you remember, as you recall, the president of Egypt, when they were trying to do assassination,
Hosni Mubarak.
right, Hussein Mubarak, it was very, very intact. It was like the entire, like Mossad, the CIA, even KGB were very amazed at how they control and how they control those assassinated people who were very trained. Right now, there is no security, but this kind of individuals who did a lot of things for Ethiopia are wanted now.
Yeah, that's very true. You see, sometimes they say, actually, in the department I teach, we had a mini conference of the faculty. I remember we were talking, and then one of our fellow faculty members said, "You see, sometimes history is cruel. Sometimes history is cruel because that's how." When people like Abiy come to power, they don't give a damn about giving credit to other people, even those who do very well for the sake of peace and stability for Ethiopia. It was the case in the 27 years, by the way. There was relative peace. My only concern was there was no democracy. But the TPLF and EPRDF have done very well in terms of securing, maintaining the security of not only Ethiopia, the entire zone. You remember that they were peace brokers in South Sudan. They were actually the major force in Somalia as well. Yeah. And the entire 27 years, we've seen peace actually. And Getachew Assefa was at the very top, of course. By the way, incidentally, he was the boss of Abiy Ahmed. Abiy Ahmed knows it very well. Mm-hmm. When he was in INSA, on top of them was Getachew Assefa. But the thing, it seems to me, is if you have a certain principled stand, if you're not like an opportunist, then people are going to go after you. Because you stand for what you believe. And that's the price you pay sometimes. Mm-hmm. People, we've seen it here too, the Martin Luthers and others. So they are looking after him. They've been looking after him. And as you mentioned, I was following the news a couple of days ago. It's Getachew Assefa and Atzbaha Gidey, Assefa Balai, and Shishai Lu'ul. All these are looking for them, actually. And the only assistant director, what was his name? Yared Zarihun. I think he's the only one who is going to face the court, I guess.
He was the deputy.
Yeah. Otherwise, all of them are in absentia. They're going in absentia, whether they're going to look for them. I don't think they will ever apprehend this, because he knows too well about these things. Okay, they cannot outsmart him. He knows it very well.
Yes.
So,
I think the last question, I think I have enough answer for that. It's clear, and they have mentioned it already previously. According to the Central Command of Tigray Defense Force, previous recent news, actually yesterday, the Tigray Defense Force have neutralized about 80,000 of Amhara militia and Ethiopian National Defense Forces. What happened to Abiy Ahmed's new military strategy to cut down the Waldia Road and to capture the Tigray Defense Force, then headed to Tigray to control Tigray by the fascist again? I was just wondering when I heard this news, and
Yeah.
What do you? I mean, I know last time he said that the war is already over. We're just, but there
Yeah.
are, but you didn't mention there are people always coming. The deceived people are still coming, but I don't think they are doing like a real war. I just like. So what's the Abiy administration's new strategy plan that he wants to cut the Waldia, and then he invites Tigray Defense Force to uh, capture, or to give up from this war. And then he said that he's going to cut the Waldia road, and then he's going to go to Tigray. So I was just like, can you tell us something about this? What's going on? This is crazy.
Yeah, the big Abe and his cronies are, I don't know. You remember last time we said the guy is so disillusioned. He's delusional. He
Yes.
has this thing like, when, by the way, when the TDF made strategic retreat from Desi and Waldia, he immediately went back to Addis Ababa because he thought they were coming to Addis straight. So he went back to the capital. And then Bacha Debala yesterday was saying, we're going to go to Mekelle. Mekelle? It's a dream now. They will never do it. They will never do it. The Ethiopian Defense Force, the National Defense Forces, the integrity of those defense forces has been compromised. It has crumbled. Now they are fighting with militias and then Fanos and others. And the newly recruited militias have no experience. They are no match to the TDF at all. And then because they thought they're going to go, oh my goodness, they're going to go back to Tigray so we can go over and take over all those previously occupied territories. That's not the case. Today, actually, there was a fighting near Chefra. So they're going to occupy Chefra too, the TDF. Okay? And in Western Tigray, there is a completely different move now because the TDF forces have moved almost into Walkite now.
Oh, good.
They're going to completely change the equation, okay? But out of desperation, what a laughing matter I want to tell you now, actually, what I heard today is in Desi, they hoisted the flag of Turkey. Can you imagine?
My goodness, this is just
Turkey, the flag of Turkey. So they're saying Turkey is not only supplying drones, but as if they are coming on the ground fighting on behalf of Abiy. You see?
yeah.
These are terrible people.
Right. This is unheard of. This is unheard of in a history of Ethiopia.
Unheard of at all. There was no such thing in the history of Ethiopia at all. And they have no regard for people. Whether people die or not, starve, they don't care. I mean, these are incredibly, I don't know. I could hardly call them human beings, as a matter of fact. But their days are numbered. You see, because now, like I mentioned in my speech, thousands upon thousands of people are joining the other federalist forces. Thousands of young Oromos are joining the OLA, Oromo Liberation Army, and the AGO too. They're having so many people coming into them, and then what is he going to do with all these federalist forces? 9 of them, and then with the Wolaita coming soon, it's going to be 10 groups of nationalities fighting the central government. I think his days are numbered. So Abiy is not going to last long.
Actually, the entire country is on seizure now. I heard his name is Oda Terbi on Twitter. He said that using Jimma and Bedelle as a staging ground, the Abiy regime's force attempted to recapture the districts of Nuna, Kumba, and Jimma Arjo, they were soundly defeated after a week of engagements. During that time, Oromo Liberation Army Force also captured Motu in Wamo Hagalo, Oromo Liberation Army. This is the spokesperson of the Oromo Liberation Army, and the entire country is on seizure now. And I don't think Abiy Ahmed is like, I mean, if people are not really wants you to be a leader, like, instead of like, wasting, dismantling the country, isn't it like, better way of like withdrawing from the power or leaving the country or something? This is unhuman.
Absolutely.
He's unhuman. I mean, why do you have to die when you are in power? I mean, it's a time to say something at this time. You need to.
Yeah. A problem is always there. This there are some opportunistic elements surrounding the Abiy government in Addis Ababa, like Brahanu Nagga and others. There are Tigrayan elements too, by the way. There are few, but I don't give a damn about these Tigrayan elements, by the way, because the majority of Tigray people are united now.
Yes.
That's what matters. But anyway, these opportunistic elements, the Tigray, the Brahanu Naggas, and many, many others, they wanted him to stay in power. There are diaspora elements too who support the Abiy regime.
Yeah.
But it's more of illusion and subjective emotion. It's not realistic at all. Some of them have really detected the might of TDF, the might of the federalist forces, and some of them have fear that Abiy is going to go soon. I mean, I'm talking about those guys who even support Abiy. They're very much concerned, but that's the way it is. History has its own mission, so it's going to end soon. So that's how I see it, and like always, I thank you for that, for your patience and for your whatever, and then we're going to do more next time. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Galadio Saraya, and our followers and subscribers of Cyber Power of Tigray Media. Please share and like, subscribe our YouTube, and we will be coming up some other time again. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Ate Ephraim. Have a good one.
You too. Okay.